Axis Cam, back with part 3. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I recommend you check those out first. We sort of do a full deep dive between how this new program, Black Ops MDA, was structured. We said we weren't going to get into strategy in part 2. We lied. We ended up going pretty deep. But in this one, Cam, you wanted to give a practical. Is that right?
100%. The best poker content starts with the big picture and then goes very micro. So for flop strategies, turn strategies, commercially in the market, that already exists and in a really sweet way. So like GTO Wizard is an amazing piece of software for looking at aggregate c-betting frequencies. You can even do it in custom sims now. Like, shout out Wizard. They're absolutely killing it there. The thing that is lacking from any commercial product is that level of vision on the river. And in the same way, you could look at aggregated flop reports and see, okay, these are the spots that are great to go polar. These are the spots that, I really want to be slowing down. Oh my gosh, there's donks on these boards. Those sort of macro views that can inform whether it be simplifications or just providing a more holistic view of the spot don't really exist on the river. And that's really been, on the technical side, the big leap forward that Black Ops MDA Syndicate has been making. So I wanted to give a demo of what that looked like and how studying a spot for us looks. So
let's jump into a hand while we're pulling it up. Those of you who didn't see episode 1 and 2 yet, Black Ops MDA Syndicate is basically the final advancement on the entire PD CFP methodology. There was a lot of stuff that when we looked at over the years, we realized could go deeper, could be packaged in a way that was more structurally efficient and also protected player identity, which was actually a big part of what we saw as sort of a conflict developing within CFP. Is like, it would be known by other players that you were training with an elite MDA syndicate, and then stuff like your screen name gets outed.
Yep.
You can lose position on basically, players who know that you're using certain tactics or strategies or even data. So this final syndicate, which now lives within Axis, is sort of the solution to MDA top level stuff that we never want to see pirated, and protects the players from basically training at the highest level, but having nobody really know that you're in that group. Is that right?
Yep, 100%. The biggest thing, or the biggest leak I saw when I was coming up through PD was, we call them polar errors. So polar error is effectively betting with your hand in a way that doesn't match what the hand is supposed to be doing. So for example, bluff catchers, you don't bet them, right? Or showdown based hands, generally you're not betting them. So the thing we saw was that, and this was the hand history that really triggered my desire to want to study rivers. I was talking with the player, and I'm like, okay, what'd you bet here? He goes, well, I bet 150% of the pot or whatever because I have a straight. And I go, okay, I hear you have a straight. How much equity do you think you have? And he's like, 70%. And even that was high because the board was 4 flush. Like, nowhere near that realm.
Mm-hmm.
But what that really pointed out for me was that players are really dialed into hand class heuristics, and hand classes are often byproducts of the equity. So that really triggered for me that if I want to bring players to the next level, I can't get away from the hand class heuristics. I should really dial them in and have that be the foundation of the coursework really moving forward. Is what are hands worth, tying that to equity, and then putting that in an optimal model. This is a hand that I love because it really highlights how river strategy is centered around hand classes that represent amounts of equity, as opposed to getting hyper dialed on removal or lost in a lot of those things that aren't the biggest driver of the spot. So
show us how it works.
Absolutely.
This is taken straight from Black Ops methodology. This is basically like proprietary frameworks that you were working on within PD when you were head coach of PD.
Yes. Yep.
All right, take us through.
Yeah, this is literally, proprietary. This is not available anywhere, what we're about to show. So, if you got your screenshots out or want to download the video, take your notes. So this is a button versus big blind, bet 25 on the flop with range, check, turn, and now we're on the river. So this is a spot that if players are looking at generally, I think they would be thinking about things like, well, my opponent, can meet MDF, or is supposed to be meeting MDF. I have bad removal, going down all these rabbit holes. So the way I look at this spot, after having studied it, is I would look at the river report, so the first thing I'd look at is the heuristics for the spot that we've built, the GTO protocols. Anything less than queen high, roughly, tends to be a bluff. And if we go to the next slide here, we can actually see what the correct answer from the hand was. As we can see, this hand is always a bluff. And it's worth the whole, freaking big blind. So the thing that a lot of players get wrong is so if you saw this hand and you thought to yourself, I would have gotten this wrong. I didn't have a spade. I don't know if my, blockers were great. That speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding of how bluffing works in theory. It's always equity first. And the equities are tied to hand classes, which then makes the hand classes the dominant, as I'm teaching it, hand classes are the dominant way I'm telling players how to bluff and what not to bluff. So if I was presented this hand history, the first thing I would do wouldn't be actually to look at this or say like, what is the right answer? Or look at even pull up the sim for it. If we can go to the next slide real quick. The first thing I would look at is the protocol we built here. And this is ripped directly from, the coursework. So in this spot, queen high and worse are going to be the bluff region. They're the most common theory bluffs. Sometimes queen high is checked, but the equity is often low enough that you still have some exploitative incentive to turn it into a bluff. One thing that's really cool too is on the value betting side, there's a lot of spots where second pair is slowing down despite the fact that it would have enough equity in a vacuum to bet. So if a person did want to exploitatively expand, they could actually start to bluff even more of these queen high type holdings in order to keep their betting range balanced. So whenever I'm teaching, the first thing I would do is, if this is a spot that we have a protocol for, that we're bringing that up and saying, hey, this is the macro strategy, then we would go to looking at the river reports. So we'll hit up the next slide here. This is a summary, and we have enough categories on this board. And this isn't something you sort of would want to read necessarily line by line when you're looking at the macro. So the darker green colors represent actions that happen at a higher frequency, and then the darker brown colors represent things that happen at a lower frequency. So as you're just looking at this, you can see, man, like under pairs through fourth pairs, those aren't being bluffed much at all. And you can see the exception clearly highlighted. So we have I think it's 187 unique river textures that really give a huge amount of coverage. So that way you can take in a whole picture and also see where the nuance lies.
So that's what we're looking at here, is down each row is a new texture.
Yes. Yep.
Plotted for the same line.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So for the hand we just said, the 10-9 that we just looked at, all we're looking at here is the heat map for what would happen with different hand classes if we changed that texture in that line.
Just the texture. So this is all just that, this is just same line, the one texture. Gotcha. So before even looking at, what about my spot in particular? And one of the things that I call the streamer special is folks will, play spot and be like, well, in this exact one. And really it's just pretending every spot is special. So that way you can just be unaccountably fly off the rails and do whatever you want. Most spots, if you look here, have pretty similar strategies. I mean, that bluffing region goes straight on down the line. And what's kind of cool is you can see also, so the reason you would want to look at this in addition to the protocol is you can see that on ace high boards, for example, queen highs are slowing down, right? So, but when they are on there, the number within the cell is the average equity. They've got like less than 1% of equity in some of those spots, or even 1% equity. So it's good to go to the deeper layer. So that way, if you're against someone who you think is really, really knows their shit, in boss type level, you could say, queen high is my standard bluff here. But against this guy, he will know I'm over bluffing if I bluff this hand and he shows me down. So you can even go beyond the protocol to get even more nuanced.
Talk to me a bit more about that, because I think that tends to be the main thing that guys who are above generic MDA end up wanting more detail on. And it's also a criticism of MDA, rightfully so.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say rumors, but basically like people who tried to criticize MDA early on made it sound like it was this reductive methodology that basically just overbluffed a spot and was easy to identify. And there's truth to that. Like the early MDA methods were guilty of that. It was so early that it almost didn't even matter. And then we hit an era where what we call resilience, which is the ability to, I would say, alternate frequencies in these threshold zones that actually matter in order for controlling your overall frequencies. This became much more important.
Yes.
We saw a new type of critic emerge that was basically like, if you're not doing this, then your MDA application is horrible.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how the newer methodology of MDA conquers this problem.
This is the evolution of MDA-backed strategies, because just getting hand history leaves out critical data. Yeah, the crux of the issue with MDA is that you don't get variance calculations. Variance calculations are huge. So for example, 3-bet, and I've talked about it before, it's my favorite line to talk about because it's the best example of this. 3-bet pot out of position, PFR, bet, check, fold. That spot averages 50% PC. So the MDA guy is going to go, you should just launch always with bluffs there, because
PC.
Oh, pot capture. So
Gotcha.
And pot capture, for folks who don't know, is the percentage of the pot you win through purely fold equity. So if someone, in this spot, right? So if you're the in position pre-flop caller, he bets twice and then checks to you. On average, if you make a bet there, you will win half the pot through bluffing. We're giving out leaks for days here.
Big pot capture.
Big pot capture. But the issue with taking that pot capture at face value is that if you set bounds and you say, okay, where do 95% of the pot captures in this spot on a line-by-line basis, where do they fall? It's between like 5% and 95% pot capture. So if the MDA guy is like, well, I should just always launch here at 50% PC, the theory guy is going to be like, well, that doesn't really work, because sometimes you'll have 5%, sometimes you'll have 95%. So what the hell do we do? So this textural methodology, you can see on the texture breakdowns where more showdown is turned into a bluff, which is where more pot capture exists, and where less showdown is turned into a bluff. So you now get to see the textures where you have more or less than the average amount of PC. So you've combined the exploitative macro edge with the nuance of these individual textures. And good luck beating anyone who can do that. That's extremely powerful.
Take me to the next slide, or talk to me about the versatility of this.
So this is incredibly valuable for the big picture here. So before, so if we're analyzing that hand, right, the 10-9 offsuit bet, and we look at this, we would see like, okay, it looks like, and 10 high and less is classified as trash. You can't find a spot where trash isn't being bluffed, right? It's being bluffed well over 70% of the time, almost across the board. So totally fine to be throwing that bet in. If we go to the next slide, we can see the breakdown of that specific texture. So here we can see on this board, we have, roughly the exact same distribution, which is your jack high and your trash or your bluffing region. And we know, like, okay, so we're, that's how it sort of looks in GTO. So if we're hitting a GTO drill, trying to drill for, that sort of a threshold, we would see this is what it looks like. Where the MDA gets combined is, let's say we have someone who's overfolding significantly. So in a profile we've historically called Sentinel, where we're saying, screw it, let's just run them over. The pot capture of this line is like 25%.
Define Sentinel profile.
Sentinel is the profile we created using hundreds of millions of hands. So looking at average reg tendencies.
And it correlates to the reg that has overfolding
by a certain
imbalances, typically, correct?
Yes. So the higher stakes you go. So in Black Ops, we have 3 different sub profiles, because as you move up in stakes, you're not dealing as often with the average player. But Sentinel, if you're like moving up in stakes, and it's like, that's the time to run people over. You're not dealing with the best players in the world at all. Often not even dealing with players who know much about theory. These are the thresholds you would want to use versus those guys. And what's funny enough is even in 5K games, I'll have some Sentinel profiles at the table.
Interesting.
So these are still good things to have in the back pocket. So I talked about like the 25% pot capture threshold. So using these, if you take an MDA lens, you could look and see, oh, ace high is averaging 17% equity. That's a hand class that versus these profiles, I should absolutely be bluffing with. Like, it could be worth an extra 10% of the pot to be finding bluffs with those hands. So these, while they are theory documents. The purpose of them is to combine this theory backing with the exploitative and individual player, the MDA exploits and individual player exploits, so you can see how those lines move on each texture. That's kind of that's like the real power there. But in terms of how do we apply this to other formats, the way these reports are built is we run a PO solver full save. Reason the full save is important is because if you are trying to generate river reports in PO solver without doing a full save, it will take as long to do that as it does to run the whole sim. It is so long, it's not practical to do without full saves. The problem with full saves is sometimes it can make your save files 100 times larger. So on the back end of I'm making this project, I've got servers, about 300 terabytes of storage. Any nerds out there, your jaws are probably dropping. It's way too much storage, but it's what has to happen in order to get these river reports to build these solutions.
We've talked about this at length together, the methodology. At this point, and I'm someone who's been in MDA for 10 years, your vernacular is far more advanced. Like, I can follow you, but there are people who are watching this who do not have an engineering background. They're probably saying, holy shit, this guy clearly knows what he's talking about, but I'm having a bit of a hard time maybe figuring out how it's practical. Now, there's also guys who have the engineering background. That's why I want you to speak in the way you're speaking, because those guys are probably tapped in and they're like, okay, I understand most of the terms he's talking about, and these are pain points that I've encountered trying to build methodology myself. So I think you did a great job of speaking to the category 2 guy. Maybe break down for me, if I'm a category 1 guy who doesn't have like such an advanced engineering vocabulary, what is the practicality for me? What am I gaining by putting my faith in an engineer or a framework that has already figured all of this out and is just giving me this actionable advice?
I think I'll map what a player who's part of the program would and should expect coming into the program in terms of support for custom river reports. So because we built this with PO, that means that I can use any set of ranges and I can really customize the game tree to almost whatever I want. That means that if a player comes in and says, hey man, I'm playing 3-bet pots. I'm trying to maybe I want to play a simplified strategy where I only have one raising size in position. I can, within a week, I can produce that game tree, run the sim, generate the river reports, and now that player has 12 to 15 lines of that game tree with those river reports. So it's custom solutions for where the player is at. Or if we go even further and we say, hey, I have a game format, like I've run the Rocket Solver sims for this game format that's big ante. These ranges are not like 6 max. What does this look like? Give me the ranges, make some, put the tree together, and I can pump that back out to that player. So what this means is that whether it mean adjusting the game tree for how you're trying to play, or if you're trying to get river data for spots that don't exist anywhere, they're not even in online databases, that's something I can get you. So that is true strategic customization to whatever a player is trying to execute.
You've gone to a really tailored level building this. I've seen the iterations you've gone through. It's one of the reasons we decided together that we should cap it at 12 members. Your ability to transform a culture was proven coming up the ranks in the PD squad. You went from trainee to coach to architect. We watched that evolution. It was one of the reasons that I thought if there's ever someone who could sort of lead the final castle of MDA methodology, it should be you. But it's because you put so much attention personalizing your students' work. I want to talk about missing piece theory because it's something that you came up with along the way. There were moments in time in the evolution of Poker Detox where engineers would come up with a theory for why players with the same information weren't getting the same results. Patrick had documented this in his era as they were breaking down at a logistical level. we'd look in and find out that guys who said that they were playing all day were actually just eating pizza for breakfast. Tell me what missing piece theory is to you, because this was your version of that realization, but you packaged it a bit differently. And I think it's potentially more actionable the way that you put it in terms of how you run a training program. What is missing piece theory?
Missing piece theory is really the acknowledgement that it takes so many things to get good at poker. And that when people do so many things right, and then their poker careers aren't going where they want to go, it's more likely that they're missing a key piece as opposed to that a whole bunch of things are wrong. So like, what are some of the things it takes to grow in poker? It takes bankroll management, right? So, setting yourself balance. But on top of that, as we talked about at length, capital allocation, right? If you're not moving money where it needs to be to make money, that's a big problem, right? It can be strategic, where maybe a player is having huge leaks in certain spots that's capping the growth. And all of those things.
Don't forget the biggest one.
What am I forgetting?
The V word.
Variance, maybe.
Volume.
Volume, Jesus. Oh, gosh. Volume, also huge. Oh, my God. The amount of, sort of consults I've done with players who, frankly, like I would be taking lessons from. Like, they are that good. Like, they teach me things every time I talk to them. Some of these guys are floating around 200 to L. And, God help the other 200 L regs who are dealing with these, killers. But they're just missing that missing piece of volume to grow to where they need to be. So it's the idea that because there's so many things it takes to scale and grow in poker, that more often than not, when you have guys who seem to be working hard, seem to be high performers, and it's just not quite coming together, it's more often that there's one missing piece that can be unique for every player that's going wrong, as opposed to they're just not cut out for it.
These high performers tend to fall into two categories of activation. I would say there's the activated group and there's the disengaged group.
Yep.
Disengaged group, we could say, is more the guys that are struggling with just straight up volume. The guys who are activated, though, they often have this issue where they're just putting their energy into the wrong things, which is an aspect of missing piece theory, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's just really hard, right? Like, if you find yourself in a group that is really talented, really good at playing well, really good at, all these things, but no one is talking about things like capital allocation, variance, all that. You can be focused and growing in a certain direction and continue to do so, but omitting this part that's critical for moving your career where you want it to go. And it may not even be blinders. It's just that no one's bringing it up.
I think it would be helpful if we maybe circle through some of the case studies, players who came up through detox, who sort of made us aware that this is a real issue. We were just at lunch and you were talking about a handful of players who we would categorize as the most intelligent players we've trained, but their return on investment was actually some of the worst on the team, which was really confusing.
Yes.
Unpack how that works.
I think I want to draw a juxtaposition between two sort of players. So there's one player who we had that was relatively new on the team, hadn't done a lot of strategy work or not nearly as deep enough of strategy work before joining the team, and played volume like his life depended on it, and ended up doing somewhat well, but had I think a win rate of about like 2 big blinds per 100. And he was extremely, he was motivated. He's like, I got to make money, got to do this thing, got to make sure, I keep the money coming in. For the other player, not as much urgency. So I think not as much of a mission there, and therefore wasn't feeling maybe the urgency to make as much money as he could. So I think that within the missing piece theory, mission is a big part of it. So for, player A, who was playing crazy volume, right, and was making a little bit of money, but working way too hard to make a little.
He didn't have proper enough theory understanding?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
His mission at this point, right, and he's already on a mission, is just, hey, dude, we need to make your play better. So that way your hourly goes up and then you don't have to spend all day grinding out your two bigs, right? For player B, it's what is your mission even, right? And those are like completely different.
B would be like the intelligent guy who already has the strategic ability, but it's just not being executed.
And very often there's, when things don't make sense, from the outside, it's because there's the two people have different sort of values or reasons for doing things. But also, like if from the outside, I'm talking to, the player who's really studied but not putting in volume. If I have sat down with players like that and said, hey, dude, if you had the same bankroll now as you do, or if you had the same bankroll that you do now that you would have in 5 years, how would you feel? And he's like, oh man, I'd find a bridge, And then I said, well, dude, 3 years ago, you had the same bankroll. Like, are you going to keep doing what you're doing? And then all of a sudden it sinks in. It's like, oh my God, like this isn't, what I've been doing hasn't been working. So very often, and that's why I love doing consults, it's unlocking the mission. And then once someone's on a mission, then it becomes, all right, let's steer this player in the right direction.
So the custom missions that are sort of built into this training operation are designed to identify the missing piece and replace the missing piece. Is that right?
I would say fill it in. Yeah.
Fill it in a way where a person can have like a sustainable marathon year of high stakes poker or ascending to high stakes poker.
100%.
And hopefully develop the character traits that allow them to reproduce that in the future.
100%. And it's different for everybody. So if we had a player come through who had a real talent for finding just the softest games, but had very poor bankroll management skills. And he, came to us on a huge downswing because he was firing huge in a soft spot and it just didn't work out. So the thing I worked on with that player was I said, here's the deal. These are your stakes. You're not going to DM me if you see a whale. I don't care how big the whale is sitting at the stake up. You're going to say to yourself, I acknowledge there's edge in this game and I could be winning in this game, but I'm going to let that go because I'm going to be disciplined for the way I've modeled my bankroll growth. That is unbelievably painful to the player who is hyper EV focused and not focused on variance or bankroll management. But that would be the opposite thing I would want to tell someone. Like we had a player who was winning 14 big blinds at 200-0 and hadn't moved up in 10 years because he's like, these 500-0 guys know something I don't. These 1K guys are, oh my gosh, this guy streams. He's got to be crazy good if he's going to stream. Like that would be the opposite piece of advice, which is just freaking do it, take the spot whenever you see it and just soar, right? It's completely different missions for different people.
So the mission is training the character trait that player needs to develop in order to become the most embodied version of their archetype, would you say?
I would say to optimize the archetype.
This word has come up recently. It's something that we're rolling out alongside Elliot Rowe. We built this hybrid mindset system with his help, where the first step is basically identifying the player archetype. We found that there were 7 key archetypes that all high-performing poker players fell into, just surveying a lot of top guys. And what comes from that is if you can give that survey to any player and identify what archetype they're in, then suddenly you also have this cascade of limiting beliefs that they need to work through in order to become the embodied version of that archetype, which is the top guy. So it's a really cool exploration in the sense that it gives the player something really clean to grab onto. If you can get your archetype assessed by guys who have a lot of knowledge over how top players think, the beliefs they have, then what we can do is systematically look at these zones of your career where you believe things different than what the top guy believes. And we can start to hammer away at the limiting perspectives, replace them with savage mindset perspectives, the type of stuff that this guy believes that if you could just hold that belief, if we could somehow transplant this belief, you would behave differently on a daily basis. And so that's been something that I think is kind of like the glue to all of this, is that there does need to be some type of mission-driven arc to a player's career where they can have the scope from experts that are saying like, we recognize how you're wired. We've trained guys with your same wiring who have been to the top. Here are the missions you are going to have to complete in order to become carved out of wood. And at that point, you will be the most embodied version of your archetype. So to me, that's the thing that stood out. When you told me you wanted to do mission-based methodology, tailored career development, that was what was so powerful to me that we've never really done before. And it's why you can't work with that many people, because everything has to just be super customized.
And it has to be very intentional to get a person to that place. So, for example, the player who is putting in the crazy volume and not concerned with things as much strategically, or because he's focused on making money, right? That's a player that I would do ones and zeros with. I'd be like, dude, you're leaving buy-ins on the table by messing these up, and I can show you those zones. And then he's going to feel inspired because I've spoken to him in his language, which is dollars per hour, right? But if you have the player who loves being in the lab, he's like, I just want to try out things to try to beat the best in the world. But that guy's playing 500 L. That's a guy I would say, dude, it's so cool what you're working on. But dude, like the guys you want to try this out on, they're playing 2K and 5K. Like keep those projects going, but let's get your volume and bankroll to a point where you are up against opponents where debuting these really cool, complex strategies where you'll actually get the reward of that. Because right now, that player is just living in a place of he's getting high off the fantasy of that he might be able to do it. So then you just have to break that and say, dude, like you're doing advanced things against unstudied opponents. Like if you want to have the fun about playing someone and really feeling those spots, you got to build the bankroll to that point. So let's just hammer out some volume and then get you to where you can have fun. Because I'm guessing that, beating someone who, doesn't know much and is floundering around at 200 now and 500 now, that isn't going to be as fulfilling as being able to own like a Linus or a Marinelli or someone because you've built something that they haven't.
Guys who seem a bit naive to how important it is to build bankroll and guys who don't really have the frameworks for how to go about building it in a disciplined, optimal way, they seem to be of a certain archetype. I won't mention which one it is exactly because there's a few, but there is a specific archetype that does not have that blind spot. This archetype has been labeled the capitalist. I think most players need a bit more capitalist in them. And it's the one thing that like, there's a very strong correlation between capitalist archetype and super top guys. Especially guys who you've seen move to private faster than most. And it's because the capitalist has a core belief that like, at the end of the day, the reason I'm playing poker is for money. And that might sound, a lot of people will be like, well, that's so bureaucratic or whatever. But it's actually what you said last time, which is like, these are people who believe that poker is measured in dollars, not win rate. And so that's a different type of framework. And personally, I think it makes you more effective, but it goes back to having different value systems. And so I guess if there is something that our agency believes in, I would say that is a core belief. And as much as that might, potentially push certain people away, I think it is actually necessary to declare that like you can be of an explorer type archetype, but if you're a hobbyist, this is not for you.
No.
And I think that distinction needs to be pretty clear before getting involved in a project like this, because if you go on a mission-based path with a program like Black Ops, and I don't know a single other program at this point in time that is curating mission-based development in the way that you are, this is a capitalist path.
And the reason this is so powerful is because we don't expect players to have everything down, and almost nobody does. So I've been really fortunate because I really love building, but I really don't like studying. So instead of drilling rivers, I spent a year building a river aggregate report system, right? That's how much I don't like studying, right? So that's something I'm not as good at. for a player to succeed within Black Ops, they don't have to be perfect at everything, but they have to be on board with the mission and then the direction it's going. So for example, if you're someone who's like, I love building these things, I don't get capital allocation. This is weird. I just don't get it. It's like, cool. That's the value we can bring, which is here's how you're going to set yourself up. Now, the part for the player is to be disciplined about maintaining it and to trust that process of how we've tried to optimize their games, their bankroll, and their development.
For those listeners who missed part 2, what is capital allocation in a sentence?
I think the better term is capital arbitrage, which is the idea that your money doesn't have the same return on investment in every spot. And it's about putting your money to where you have the greatest return on investment. So
the allocation of where you put your money on which sites gives you arbitrage that a lot of people are leaving on the table.
100%. 100%. So cleanest example I can think of, right? So let's say you have a site that has instant deposits. You're incentivized to have as little money on that site as possible. That way you can fund other sites. And if big games pop, you just deposit and call it a day. The models, when you have more and more sites, do become increasingly complex. And that's why there's so much edge to be carved out. And, because the bankroll isn't some amount of money sitting in a vault. The bankroll is, I've got 10K over here, 5K over there. Oh, 3K is coming back to me from a site in 2 weeks. It's all of those things. And it gets much more complicated, but as a result, gives you opportunity for much more edge by maximizing it.
One of the best ways to stay out of that mess is to not put money on sites that have bad ROI to begin with.
Yeah.
I think we learned that together managing Poker Detox.
Yeah.
As you were coming up the ranks, I mean, what people don't know about how a staking company is managed at scale behind the scenes is that most of our executive meetings are geared towards capital efficiency.
Yep.
And so what we'll do in a meeting is we'll lay out, 6 players on the table. Here's the guys we're working with today. And we would go in and we would basically do an entire capital intelligence assessment on all of the sites they're on, the amount of money they have in each. This was when we started developing a lot of these niche industry terms that I don't think anybody else really uses except us. Like capital drag is a term you'll hear in, other business models. It's not foreign, but applying capital drag to a poker model, well, what that would be is if you have money stuck on a site over here, or as you mentioned in the last episode, it could even be that not all of your money is on the table when you're playing a session. Even that's a form of capital drag.
Yep.
Capital velocity is how fast can I move money from one site to another. So if you're playing on a site that's not crypto native, you're going to have a hard time getting money out quick. Meanwhile, if you got 10 guys in Vegas playing, tournaments and cash games for the series, you have nearly instant capital velocity because player B can walk across the hall to player A and hand him 10K in chips. All of these things ended up being aspects of what eventually became a whole capital intelligence framework that we never released and that we decided to just embed into the back end of Black Ops. So the capital intelligence syndicate is how we design these mission-based paths for all of these players. And you're on the ground as a player who has firsthand knowledge of how to navigate that. I mean, you basically created the minimum stake theory, which says that if you're cleared for 500 NL, you should never play 200 NL pretty much ever again. Get the hell away from 200 NL. And how much that increases your hourly is insane. But it's all these ways that we've managementally optimized. Things that the player not only doesn't understand, but probably has no interest in wanting to navigate for himself. So he just gets to outsource all of that and focus on playing.
And this content, I mean, I haven't heard about it from other poker sources or podcasts, whatever, much at all. And I think a big reason for that is because most people in poker are losing players. So the majority of content, if it's centered at targeting the masses, is going to be, here's how you start winning at poker. That's step one. That is the hardest step, but that's what gets talked about the most, which is why a lot of these capital strategies are talked about nearly as much. So then for the players who are winning, and it's very hard to be winning, already like top 10%, top 5% of online players, if you're just winning, now you're in this land where there's much less content for you about how to continue growing. And that's why we see such a wide disparity in outcomes for people who have a similar, high performance skill set, because a lot of these guys are just trying to figure it out, hope they find the right thing and scale. Because outside of what we've talked about on these pods, I don't think people have really laid out the blueprint for taking that skill set and turning it into a career where you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Maybe it would be cool to go through a certain amount of examples of how we would identify a missing piece for different types of players. I think this is really what allows the audience to kind of self-assess and see, okay, maybe that would be something that actually helped me. So like, let's start with a few different players. I'll start off with a guy who, say we do an assessment with him, and I mean, we've been doing this for so long that like, if we get a guy talking, which is really the best way to run these assessments. I mean, we had talked about doing like a multiple choice thing for this program. And we sat down and we were like, honestly, we always know what it is if we can get them talking for like 15, 20 minutes. We can always identify the missing piece. So let's just do that. Let's say we identify a guy has a volume issue, which could happen in a number of ways. I mean, it could just be the way that he haphazardly tells us about what his schedule looks like. Sometimes you can identify just because there's definitely like gaps in his schedule and you're like, this is not a full representation of the day. Like, we got the same 24, bro, but like when I hear your story, it's like you only have 8. Well, this happens a lot.
We had this with me during an accountability challenge, because we were like, let's put in, do as many hours as we can, just go as hard as possible, try to optimize everything. And I remember I was averaging like 8 hours a day, and I was so wiped, I could like not function. And you just texted me, you're like, there's no way, what I know about you, you're, 27 or whatever. There's no way you should be exhausted after 8-hour days. Like, this just doesn't add up. And I think you brought up sleep. And then sure enough, my sleep was insane.
You were drinking coffee at like midnight.
Oh yeah, it was, yeah.
During this period of time, at least.
Oh yeah, 100%. And then that was like the missing piece for me. Unlocked an extra few hours a day for me to be working. And I was also more functional during those hours because I was getting good sleep.
Right.
And if you had asked me what was my issue, I probably would have said, oh, I think I spend, sometimes 20 minutes driving to the Chipotle or whatever, and then coming back. And I could just eat food at home. But it's like, no, there's hours over. And this thing I wasn't even looking at, it would have never considered unless I had, and in this case, it was you, right? Saying like, hey, this might be your missing piece to unlocking more productivity.
The only reason I can see that, though, is because, well, for one, it's something I have had a trait weakness with in the past. And for two, it's easier to see it when you look at someone else's logistics than if you're to look. For some reason, it's really hard to self-assess. Like, we don't really know why this is as humans. But to have experts who have not only moved through that evolution themselves, but have trained players, recognized patterns, and can look in on a situation and be like, this looks a lot like player XYZ from category in the past. This guy's almost definitely struggling with this. Let's probe a little bit more in the direction of sleep and actually figure it out. And if we find that it's a hit, let's create a mission-based objective for him to stay consistent with that. Because honestly, it takes, what do they say, 64 days to train a new habit or something like this. And so like the mission really is the lock-in period. Where you can convince your subconscious, I can do this new thing. Like, I can stay consistent with this thing. And once it happens for long enough, you actually you have an identity shift there. That's what we're really going for with mission-based training.
That's why we capped at 12. Because seriously, because there has to be, those things are really freaking hard. And if, we're going to charge something for a program, we're damn well going to add value. Like, I will never be part of something where I'm not creating, a significant amount of value. So if it's 64 days for me with that player, I'm not going to hold your hand, but you will be able to feel my presence. We'll be checking in, and I'll be with you through the process of filling in that missing piece so your career can explode. I won't do it any other way.
When you say that, I think what the dot that gets connected for me is that the real value a course offers is the accountability that it can generate.
Yes.
And I think this makes total sense because the courses that have done the best, the programs, the eras in which PD performed the best was when we had coaches who were on the ground generating that accountability in battle with players too. And there's something about that the players respect. And when there's also expert management above it where there's tailored career development occurring in ways that are theoretically congruent with how real businesses operate. Like, hey, bro, you've got capital drag here. We got to have more velocity so your funds get over here so your ROI can go up over 5 sites. We can use these concepts that poker players are either understudied in or just don't even have an interest in wanting to learn about because they just want to play.
Yep.
But we can certainly leverage these concepts to get poker players the best results. And so I think it's the accountability to knowledge that may lie outside of your domain and even maybe your interest that you really get the most benefit from when you're working with advisors who have sort of evolved through all of the motions of having to figure out how to scale in this industry. So let's do another example. We talked about volume guy. Give me an example of a guy who comes in with a different missing piece that we've seen maybe through the detox files and how we would go about creating a mission for him to get to the other side.
So I think the archetype that is the easiest to motivate is the capitalist. Because the capitalist is I want to be making money, right? And that the money, that journey, it's funny. They did a study where they asked people what amount of money would make them happy. Every person answered 30% more, regardless of how much they had, which is really funny. But for the capitalist, like the journey is the destination. So they almost have it easy. But for guys who are wired differently, it can be a lack of a overarching goal, which is what would this money mean for you? What won't you have, or what is the cost of continuing on the path you're on now and getting the results you're getting? So for example, I talked with a player who very high performer, super smart, and really can hang. I think he could hang in any game in the world. I truly believe that. He's got like 15K in his bank account. So I'm talking with him. I'm like, I was like, I'm just confused because you could be making $500,000 a year. Your ceiling's it might be higher than mine. Like, what the hell's going on, man? And he says, well, right now I'm in a very serious, committed relationship. I'm with someone who I would want to marry. We're living in this place. I'm a little bit outside of regulated. And I said, like, okay, so I hear you. What is she doing? And he's like, well, she, is in school, studying 50 hours a week, all this stuff. I'm like, okay, so let me ask you this. Like, what would it mean for, the two of you if, when she graduates, she gets her job, if you guys can just get into a house with a dog or something, right? And he's like, oh, that would like be amazing. And it's like, okay, so... And I was like, okay, so if she didn't see you quite as much during the week, but you still had your intentional time, with the person you love outside of, or on the weekend, whatever it is, would that have significant negative impact on your relationship? He's like, well, I suppose it wouldn't. It's like, okay, so the conversation you got to have with your significant other is, hey, I want to build an incredible life with you. To do that, I have to, head out during the week and go and play in a pool that's significantly softer. So that way we can make the memories together. Because now having talked about that, the cost of him not playing the volume is he can clearly map the memories, and memories are what fill the soul, right? They're like who we are. It's beautiful. Him not playing is costing him future parts of his soul with someone who's the love of his life, which is like tragic. So now it's like a Shakespearean arc almost onto, go play more volume. Why do you hate money?
I think what you're great at is you have a really strong ability to connect a struggling player with the consequences of procrastination. And that doesn't even need to be laziness. It could just be like, you're not taking the step that you need to take in order to get to the next level because it's unfamiliar or it's going to require change. what seems to be the through line to a lot of underperformers who stay stuck is that they don't have this ability to conceptualize time
Yeah.
in a way that makes the consequence of the action real.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the craziest thing about life is that even in my own life, there are, and I consider myself to have been a high performer the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
I have like a 5-year gap in my 30s that like I can't really tell you what progress I was making looking back on it. Like I know I was doing something, but I know in that 5-year gap, like if I were being totally honest and I was under like an objective review, there would be a lot of shit I could have done differently that put me on a faster track or a more efficient track or saved energy. And it's just fascinating to me, back to the whole condition of being human, our inability to self-assess accurately, to be able to put your trust in people, to be humble enough.
Yeah.
Which is really what I think, getting back to the capitalist is a humble archetype. A lot of people might think like, oh, that guy just cares about money. But it's like, I don't think you get it. It's like the caring about money is what allows him to take the feedback, to do whatever it takes to get to the actual goal. And all these other archetypes often are just bullshitting. Look at like the explorer, and it's a beautiful archetype. This is the guy who loves puzzle solving.
Yep.
And the game is just this, it's always just blossoming into the next puzzle to solve. And there is a purity around that that's just tantalizing. I understand that. But if that goes too far, that guy loses sight of the fact that he also has a vision of battling it out with the boys at the top, and he's never even going to be able to be there because he just doesn't have, I mean, you mentioned this guy in the last episode.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you don't even realize you have 15K in the bank because you've never put a high enough preference on building the role, which is just another part of this career you got to get dialed in.
Well, I think it's also archetypes aren't right, wrong, or the other. It's they're perfect for different situations.
Stages.
Almost, yes, absolutely. Like the explorer is going to thrive in the high stakes environment where a lot of those guys have teams creating unique strategies designed to reg battle, right? The explorer is going to crush that environment. That's not an environment that I personally would do quite as well in because I love my aggregate reports. I love the big picture. I love seeing things from 1,000-foot view and then being able to just dial into these little things. But the explorer, if he sees if I see something non-traditional, the first thing I'm going to think is how often does this spot come up? Is it worth my time to look at it? All that stuff, right? But if someone comes out with something new, the explorer might look at that and go, wait, why the hell is he doing this? Okay, it might be for these reasons. And then he's found dimension of edge that I would have never bothered to even look at, right? But that skill is misplaced if you're taking those frames to crazy low volume. Like one of the, I guess get off the soapbox, so to speak. I remember there was a hand that Stefan played that I got DMs about it all the time. They said like Stefan went for a donk, and then bluff caught the raise. And they were like, this was the sickest hand. It's a board where there is never donks. I just couldn't believe this happened. How do these high stakes guys do it? And I said, let me ask you this. If a fish did that, would you even look at it? And they go, no, I'd say that's just fish shit, right? So for the guys who are those explorers, right, you're at the lower level, you're like putting grand strategic principles onto someone who is probably too drunk to see their screen, right? So for those guys, like, man, like, and it's all about the frame. It's like, dude, let's get you to the point where you can do that really cool stuff against people who are, if they're donking with intention, like, and it's waiting for you. Like at 200 and out, people are just not at the level where you can play against them. I did a deep dive on a player who his turn donk percentage was 12 compared to GTO, which is 4. And getting to brainstorm how a person would explore that with a study partner I had was awesome. Because you're like, well, if he donks 8%, he could probably just build a wider donking range without actually experiencing any EV regret, right? And then, but once you reach 12, it's probably so wide there might be something there. And then one of the fun principles from the detox engineers of old is attack the merge. Donks are merged, so it's like, okay, well, if he's donking with too wide of a range, and it's triple what it's supposed to be in theory, we probably have a turn hotspot here. Like that shit's fun, but it has to come at the right stage. Like let's just, for the explorers and the people who love poker strategy, it's about getting to the point where you can use that cool stuff to actually own your opponents. Because to own an opponent, they have to be competent.
Archetypes are so interesting because, like you said, there's not one that's right or wrong or more right than the other. They all contain their strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe we could say the perfectly balanced poker player has all of the most mature qualities from every archetype. And he's just basically gleaned each balance at each next stage of his career.
I wouldn't say has them. I think has found a way to frame the things that those other archetypes achieve in a way that is congruent with who that person is.
Interesting.
So for the capitalist, right? That guy's focused on making money. If for the spot I described, like the explorer is looking at the turn donk because it's like, this is cool. What if there's something there?
Right.
The frame for the capitalist is there's money here. Go freaking find it.
Yeah, it's funny you use these two against each other because I am a capitalist, tried and true in terms of how I test on the archetypes. I have a very low tolerance for the explorer when I'm paired with him in a study group or, if I'm training him. And by low tolerance, I mean, this is super meta, but the degree to which you can accept a person for their archetypal weakness is the degree to which you also have an intolerance for them. It's super paradoxical, but only by accepting someone for their weakness do you become intolerant of their weakness in a way that will expose it viciously. It doesn't mean you have to be harsh, but it goes back to what we were saying in the last episode where it's like, if you sit at a table with top guys and you talk hands, there's certain things you cannot say or you must leave the table.
Yep.
Because you're interfering with the field in a way that's just detracting from the session. And so if you put me with an explorer, the first thing that will happen when the explorer goes on his first little dovetail about how cool it is to study this spot, I just get immediately uninterested because it just registers to me as there's no real alpha here. Like, are we not studying to outperform the previous version of ourselves? And are we not doing that to make more money? Because those two things are true in my world. So why are you so entertained? It's the level of entertainment that the explorer has with things that don't actually move the needle. But then you get into the values. Does the explorer actually care about money? And this is where I feel like the explorer is deeply conflicted.
Well, here's where so within Black Ops, this is how we reconcile the explorer to focus them properly. We have a list of all the lines and the associated EVs of each line relative to each other. So we can say what the most powerful zones to study are. But I'll tell you the most complicated zone I've seen is the and it's the number one line is actually the most complicated. It's the 3-bet pot out of position PFR bet. That thing looks nuts in terms of it's tough but not crazy hard for value betting, but it's very, very difficult for what hands you're supposed to be pulling bluffs from. It's something where it's the most studying intensive, and not all the lines are like that. Like we saw button versus big blind. That's also very high on the top 20 list, but it's super simple. So what we can do with the explorer is say, if you're going to go nuts studying this shit, go nuts in these zones and go nuts in these prioritized EV generating zones, and then go from there instead of getting lost in micro nuance against a smaller subset of players. So if someone's, like I said, if they're an explorer and they're good at that, like within the program, it's like, here's where we're going to point you in your study. So that way you can capitalize off of that trait. And we're also going to hold you accountable and make sure you're still doing the things to grow and to make money. But we can leverage the way you're wired into the highest possible returns. It's like having someone who's, money focused or ROI focused as the coach allows that positioning.
It's a great lead to a quote that I sent you yesterday. I think it sums up the arc of the explorer pretty beautifully. Back to the entertainment thing. It's like they're entertained for too long in zones that are not high impact enough. And so the job of a capitalistic mentor when you're dealing with an explorer is to be like, love that you're so enthusiastic. Let's just gear it towards spots that actually move the needle.
Yep.
Alex Hormozy posted this the other day. You and I are super long on all of his stuff, and so much of it just applies to performance in general. The quote is, everything that was once hard with enough repetition becomes boring. And you become a master by repeating it enough times when it's boring that you find out something new that makes it hard again. If the explorer could integrate this principle, he becomes a capitalistic beast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really the types of transformations that when players have these perspective shifts in how they look at their overall career,
mm-hmm.
and it reinforms how they train, that's the missing piece.
I think one of the traps in poker for the explorer is that, because the explorer is like, I just want to look at these things and understand everything. The problem with poker is that the game tree is so wide, you can never stop exploring, and then subsequently rarely look at spots that actually matter. Like, you can study forever and gain very little. So I think that for explorers in poker, if that's your archetype, you are struggling a little bit, think about exploring. Think about what it would take to completely explore a spot. So, like, for example, if you are interested, if you're like, I'm super interested in turn barreling. If you force, or like in 3-bet pots, for example, in 3-bet pots, if you force geometric sizing on the turn, there's almost zero EV regret. So if you're someone who is an explorer, instead of looking at those turn spots and going, like, ask yourself, what would it take for me to conquer a spot? Because if you see like, oh, I've got a 3 sizing strategy, all this mixing, and you just start like trying to understand and anticipate what other sims look like, you'll be lost forever. But if you say, I want to master, like, what does it look like if I only go geometric on this turn? All of a sudden, you have turn reports, if the person were to seek them out, that you can actually understand. You have one sizing strategy. You can actually conquer the spot. But I think the explorer gets lost in all the possibilities instead of saying, let me nail one simplified model at a time and then expand once I have that down. I think that's one of the traps of the explorer.
One of your strongest traits is conquering the spot, I would say. The level of conviction that you will be able to talk about a specific spot that you've conquered is what I thought set you apart when I was observing how you would analyze hands coming up the ranks in the detox team. It also is what made you a team leader, because you could just talk to a guy with a level of conviction where he could feel Cam has conquered this spot. And when I see guys with you, what I notice is they want to draw off the level of conviction that you have in a certain spot. It's similar to like what I see when, with Magnus Carlsen, when he does Banter Blitz, like, people don't watch those because he gives away super high level analysis. They watch it because they want to draw off the conviction where they know he's integrated the spot. It was the main thing that was bizarre to me about watching those when I started tuning in, is just like, he's not even saying anything all that great, but it's the conviction. And I think what you're able to do is, assuming someone's in a group with you where you feel comfortable exposing that level of detail, it's like you've got the conviction and you can go to super high detail on what the perspectives strategically are that they are lacking, that do not allow them to see the spot similarly to you. In the first episode of this series, I think you talked a lot about how if you can see how a player is analyzing a hand at a particular decision point, if you can hone in on that, it's very simple for you to say, okay, you lack this theoretical concept. We need to train this, because this thing is the thing that's stopping you from having mental flexibility in this zone. Can you talk a little bit more about how you diagnose that when you're listening to a player and you're creating this landscape of how he's thinking about the spot or the concept? Your conviction seems to be that you can identify the principle that's missing in his framework. And then you try to basically implant that. Give me an example of how this works, because I really think it's where your magic sort of kicks in as a coach. Your ability to identify what is the missing concept that's preventing you from solving this hand properly.
There was I forget who the director of Eraserhead was, David Lynch maybe, and whoever directed that, he was known for directing crazy films that no one else could think of. And when they interviewed him, he brought up the fact that he has the same lunch every single day. And the interviewer was like, well, that seems like the opposite of creative. Like, I would have thought you would have been doing crazy, lunches, foods, shake up your day all the time. And what he said was that the repetition of that gave him the freedom with all other parts of his day to be creative. So always being able, in a similar state of mind allowed him to see and think much better. So that same principle is what applies to poker. So the reason I'm able to dissect things quickly is because instantly, if I'm presented with a thought process that isn't repeatable, I cannot evaluate it at all. There's things that a person should think about in every single spot, every single poker hand. Like, for example, how good is your hand, right? There is no poker hand where you're not considering that thing, right? Or how much are they folding? Once again, there is no spot where that should not exist, unless you're calling it all in, right? So what I listen for are those things that have to be present in every hand, and then talking to that player about, and whether it be my methodology, which I call equity hotspot bucket, or hand class exploit bucket, whether it be either of those things, I just say you have to be able to present it to me repeatably. So if you got in this spot tomorrow, the framework we established today, you'd be able to apply and come up with the same answer. So if the infrastructure of the thought process isn't in that repeatable way, I can't even look at. And what I find is that once that gets ironed out with the player, so we get rid of things where I'm like, well, I figured he would always fold top pair. It's like, whoa, we're jumping the gun. What's the hand class we have here? Okay. How much is he folding? All right, that might influence that part of the process, blah, 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 and going from there. So an example of this in action, I was playing a 5K game, and I was 3-bet pot in position pre-flop caller, and he went bet check. And I had a hand that pure jam in theory, and I knew it was a pure jam in theory. So the way I evaluated the spot, I used, equity hotspot bucket, right? I said, okay, I think my hand in theory has like 95% equity. The fold equity, the pot capture is going to be huge. It's going to be probably like 70%. This would still be a jam in theory, but I ended up checking it. The reason I checked it is because in the bucket stage of things, this is where the high performance thing kicked in. I said, for this bet to be functional, my opponent has to be value betting correctly. He has to be hitting all of his thin 3-bet pot out of position PFR jams. Most people don't, because there's some really juicy mechanics to that spot that a lot of people don't understand as to how thin they should be jamming out of position there. So I said, this either has limited upside for jamming, or it's torching because he has all these hands he's not supposed to have that he would be check calling instead of jamming himself. So I ended up checking, and I got, a great feedback loop, because I saw he had a hand that was multiple pips higher than mine, that was a pure jam in the solver that he left in his checking range. So the standardization of the thought process isn't about restricting the thought process. I had the room to be creative and say, I'm going to check a hand that's a pure jam because of this thing this other guy's doing, because I had practiced the regimented, what's my equity? What's the hotspot? What do I want to do with it? The standardization enables creativity. It doesn't restrict it.
So having the standardization allows you to use observational power in the moment to adapt?
To optimize. Yep.
What is that? Because I want to be able to put a word to that. And it sounds like it's a mode of clarity that a lot of guys don't have access to in game. The ability to calibrate in that way around observations while staying principled. Because in the last episode, you talked about how a lot of people will just like stack these probabilistic assumptions on top of each other that end up not being accurate. But like what you're doing there is like, you make a laser sharp observation that this thing's going on in this guy's range that either should or should not be happening. And then you're able to make an adjustment informed by that thing. Yeah.
So there's 3 tiers of performance in my mind. And this might upset some people watching, but I'm gonna drop it. And we're going to start with low performance. So once again, something cannot be analyzed unless it's repeatable. So low performance would be, like I said, the equity hotspot bucket. What's my hand's equity? What's the hotspot? What's the optimal value betting? So I think that's low performance, but functional. And that's still way better than the majority. High performance is you have this foundation, and then you take things that might be probabilistic or white magic, and you see if you can plug them in the system. The reason that's important is because your foundational stuff of like, what's my equity? How much are they folding? Those are absolute variables, right? Those are things you're saying, this is the number. This is what I think it is. These are rock solid. These are not going to suffer from the issue of stacking assumptions that result in low accuracy outcomes. So you get that done. And then I would say we have high performance, which is you've nailed the lower performance thing, which is getting your, cookie cutter. These are the things I have to think about. And then you get to add these cool other things like, is this guy value betting too thin? Is he value betting more? And then you put those into variables and then insert them into your system. So for example, so the way I wrote my adjustment was I said, equity is 95%, and then hotspot's this. I have a value bet. I said, well, in some worlds, this guy's not going to be value betting thin enough. So that'll drive down my equity. I think my equity is closer to 85% on average. I don't think this is a good value bet anymore given the size of the hotspot. So adjusting the inputs, the rock solid mathematical inputs based on what you're observing, putting those things to a variable. An example of live poker, you think you're in a super under bluff spot, right? But a guy gives you a super significant live tell that he's full of shit, right? All of a sudden you'd go, okay, I have these properties that in MDA land or whatever make this under bluffed, but I'm actually going to add points to my bluff catching score because of this thing I observed. I'll put a number on the amount of points this thing's worth. And now all of a sudden it's shooting through the roof and you have a slam dunk call. So what I call no performance is when you show up to the spot and you go, this guy's not value betting thin enough. Your brain explodes because you have no standards and there's no telling what you're going to do because you've thought about these other things before the foundational thing. So then what happens if you don't start with the foundational thing is you kick off your thought process with a probabilistic assumption. So if you take the certain things or the things that you prescribe.
This happens so much, by the way.
So my God.
Just to stabilize this. So it's no performance is the worst mode.
Yeah.
Then low performance. And then the third tier is high performance.
Yeah.
No performance is when you don't have a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Would this be like an easy way to put it? And you start off by just grabbing at anything that may make you feel a bit safer about not knowing what the hell you're doing. It's like the first thought that like you could basically contact is what you start to build an assumption around.
Yeah, like as an example, like if you go like, oh, this guy seems nervous. You now have this thing that's the start of your thought process that is true a smaller percentage of the time. And now the whole house you build on top of these things is not great. And a great example, or an example of this might be if you're just reaching for things like, and you're building a house, right? Did you bring your concrete for the foundation? Did you remember to bring shingles for the house, right? And then all of a sudden, by the time you're done building these things, because you didn't know what you needed for the house ahead of time, just grabbed random shit and it's going to collapse, right? You don't have to sit down and say, I have this thing I didn't study strategically. It's like, oops, I guess I messed it up. And then you never have to sit with the fact that you should be doing things to enhance your performance on the table strategically.
I've never heard the no performer label. I guess I would wrap this segment up by saying the no performer, if he remains insistent about that way of thinking, he becomes labeled untrainable.
Yes. Now,
on the opposite end of the spectrum, and we sort of went into this in the last episode where I said, like, I have a ruthlessly high standard for the level of data point analysis that I will basically entertain. Like if we're sitting with guys, one of two things is going to happen. Either we're going to be in a conversation that really lights everybody up because the standard for the data point analysis and the speculation is at an all-time high, or you're going to see me basically telling people to exit the room or I'll just leave because I can't be in a conversation that operates from the untrainable paradigm. It's just it's actually draining.
Yeah.
To have hand history analysis discussions with guys that don't hold themselves to the type of standard that we know you have to hold yourself to if you're going to be top. So,
and sometimes sometimes people have that lever, but they don't and aren't practiced in using language that properly represents what they're seeing. So like as an example, I saw a hand history, a guy talking through a hand history, and he saw a snap flop check. And he said like, okay, we got a timing tell here. This guy's probably got ace king. It's like, okay, that's way too precise and way too, but so what's cool is he identified the timing tell, right? So if he identified that, he might say like, okay, so he had a hand where he had to make a decision quickly, right? This means that it's probably not marginal value. So given the fact that he acted quickly, it's less likely to be a cognitively intense hand he's holding. His range construction is, maybe different in this way or whatever it is. It may also be the case that like he's range checking pure there in the spot or whatever. But the key is to, when you identify things, to give them the correct amount of, or to have the disclaimers about the certainty of the read. Because the fast check doesn't tell you everything.
And that's the thing that's like, when I say I don't have a tolerance for it, it's like, if there's no probabilistic accountability, that's when I'm just like, I have a very difficult time entertaining the conversation. Because if someone were to say something, like, I don't know if he said he thought he had ace king or he definitely didn't have ace king. Which one was it?
He said he definitely had ace king.
He definitely has ace king.
Yeah, because of the snap check.
Like, it's hard for me to get there. I don't even know how you even unpack that, because the only thing you can actually say to that person is, do you realize how that's a projection of how you would play ace king?
Yeah.
Because it is every time.
100%.
Or it's a projection of how you've seen a fish play ace king once, and then you think all fish do this or whatever. But either way, it's not a based assessment. And so you see people do this type of thing often. It's the first layer you have to crack to see if someone's truly trainable for a high level program, in my opinion. And so like, yeah, a big part of assessments originally, and I think it's what you're so good at, is like really probing. I've never seen anyone as gifted as you at this, because you have more, your bedside manner is much better than mine as a doctor who's probing for the so you can go in a consult and you can like be looking for these things that like you're sniffing around, but you're also showing him like a Zoom share where it's like, oh, and look at this cool thing, and like your bedside manner is so much more gentle while you probe for these things, where I often feel like if you get in a room with me at this stage where I'm like sort of on my way out of training and I'm just more of like in the overhead capital intelligence advisory syndicate where we look at your shit and I'm just like, he needs to be doing this, get him to do this, Cam. I can't go into that consult as gently as you can and like have an impact on people who will get scared away by like lethally precise feedback. So I just want to acknowledge that that's the skill set that I think makes you such a good coach at this stage of your career. I think I was better suited for it 10 years ago than I am now, because I'm just not entertained anymore by a lot of the stuff that we've just heard thousands of times. So poker needs more guys like you right now who are properly balanced between, the empathy side of the consult and also the discernment to be able to say, and once you can acknowledge that this thing's real, we need to do this. And I think a lot of the coaches who have your level of empathy don't have this side of it. So
the thing that's and I think that what people get wrong about coaching people out of hyper assumptive data points is it's two things. So the first is just asking like, okay, how do you know that? Can we prove that? And as soon as they say, I can't, it's like, okay, so do you think it's a good idea to be having layered strategic decisions when we can't hold the decision accountable and we can't prove it? And when you lay that out for players, like, oh my God, I'm actually just in some chaos land. That's kind of how it breaks down. The other way is there's just so many tools to prove things now. And that's the thing I freaking love about the Black Ops River reports, is now we can prove a lot of these things. So for example, one of the things I've heard is, well, I shouldn't go for overbets in a bet check bet because I just never have value there. I'm like, you don't? And I'll literally do this. I will pull up a random bet check bet sim. Wizard has this functionality. You can click random. And I'll say, let's see if we can find a single board where there isn't a bet check bet overbet.
Yeah.
And it is always in there.
And this is the same issue as before with the ace king. It's just like, dude, you're not used to playing that line with value. And so you assume that everybody thinks you don't have value in that line. It's just a projection.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love how you do this. It's been one of the most rewarding things in my own progression as a coach to a manager and now an owner, to just be able to watch someone come in and do things the right way at a time where I don't have the energy to do it at the level that you do it. So I've been really just grateful to see that there's people who have come up through our methodology and our clinics that are able to put something together and keep innovating on it in the way that you've done. And I think you've come up with something truly revolutionary with this new framework. And I think that the way that we've been able to package it into a total career development transformation is pretty cutting edge. I don't see anybody out there doing it in this tailored of a way. We're only taking 12. You're opening August 1st. If you see this publicly, it will probably be taken down within a few days because it will be gone once we hit 12. Maybe we'll release it again in the future if we decide to take some more. If you are someone who's been interested in the archetype stuff, we're doing this thing with Elliott Rowe. Basically, we send you through an assessment. It'll get your archetype. We can show you the most common pitfalls of your archetype. You can identify the ones that feel the most true for you. And then we send you to Elliott to clear it with Hypno. If you're interested in that, just hit the details below. We'll get you your archetype and we will show you exactly what belief systems you're going to have to overcome to get to the other side. And the top 1% of guys who have your same exact wiring who did it. Cam Black Ops incorporates this type of mindset training to identify the archetype. Once the archetype is identified, they go through the tailored consult career development plan. At which point we send them on the mission-based paths that basically drill the accountability needed to get the job done. August 1st, if they're interested, click the link below wherever you see this. It'll either be public or it'll be on our socials. It'll send you to a few quick questions and you go straight into a consult with Cam. Tell us how the consult works real quick so they know what to expect.
So the things you should come prepared with are a synopsis of your poker journey, the stakes you're playing, the volume you're playing, and where you're playing them. Almost all the indicators of issues are usually buried in some of those things, and I can see them very, very, very quickly. It's so, if I see someone come in, right, and they're like, well, I'm playing very big, volume very low, I know instantly. Volume issue, capital allocation issue. And then in the console, we'll talk through and try to unpack those things and see what sort of plan makes sense for continuing to grow. Those are the biggest things.
Consult identifies the missing piece.
Yes.
Once we have the missing piece, you'll see the whole breakdown of the arc that is a mission-based plan to basically overcome the weakest link. Axis Cam, August 1st. I'm super excited for you to launch this thing. I'm very proud of you and all of the accomplishments you've had along the way, all the people I've seen you help. Nobody deserves this opportunity more than you. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you too.